Welcome to Live Stories, a podcast that holds space for inspirational interactions that are real about navigating the challenging journey of separation and divorce. Expect laughter and some tears. It's all welcomed because Lived Stories is meant to be a safe space. A lived truth. Be brave enough to break your own heart. And on the parking lot in front of the Lowe's store, I spoke to the judge on the phone and finalized my divorce. That was at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic when the courts had to conduct business virtually. And I thought to myself, wow, that's it? No, but for real, that's it. After 14 years of marriage, it had boiled down to a phone call that lasted 10 minutes. A part of me expected more. Another part of me, the non-brave part, was relieved that I didn't have to go to a court and explain to a judge in person what a failure I am, that I had broken the promise I made to God and the vow I said to my then husband, pledging for better or worse, that I was selfish to choose myself and to break up a family or to face the judgment and feel shame of folks in a courtroom. But here's the thing. What I knew in the deepest part of me was that I was doing the right thing, even though it caused heartbreak, mine included. And if I'm honest, I had doubts going into the marriage, but did and said nothing to anyone. So be brave enough to break your own heart. This Cheryl Strait quote has been a guiding principle in my life's journey and a lived truth that I'd like to pass on to you, listener. Doing the brave thing is scary, and of course it is. That's why it's brave. In the divorce and separation journey, there are going to be many hard things and decisions you're going to face. Real talk, and like it ain't going to be easy, and every separation and divorce occurrence is unique and nuanced. So how did I end up divorced and what was I doing in the Lowe's parking lot? Well, it's a long story, 14 and a half years long to be exact. Many times when a thing ends, you start to reflect and go back to the beginning. And what I've learned is that endings are really the gateway to new beginnings, reflecting the journey of circling back to the start. And in this circle dance of change, we find meaning in both closure and renewal. When I go back to the beginning of my courtship, dating, and marriage, I realized that I never should have gotten married in the first place. I'm 26. I didn't really even know who I was, but you couldn't tell me otherwise, child. I didn't know what I wanted for a husband. I didn't truly understand what a true Christian marriage was. Not like I had a healthy marriage modeled for me when I was growing up. And I realized that I created this fantasy really because I wanted to be rescued, if I'm honest, to have someone take care of me. But of course, I didn't know that at the time. You are responsible for your own fulfillment and happiness. After years of therapy, I uncovered that I had issues. Ha. Underneath it all, I really was masking my own abandonment issues. The fact that both my parents didn't choose me, that's another layer we'll dig into later. And I was trying to fill this void. I chose things, people to fill in those gaps. And a husband, well, it felt like a great and permanent way to fill the void. Sounds like a 26-year-old mindset to me, honey. I just didn't dawn on me that the whole death do us part thing was like a forever ever thing. Like forever ever. Net my thinking was flawed from jump. You have professionals for hair and nails, a professional that's also needed for mental wellness. Get a licensed therapist that practices in your state to help you in your separation journey. It wasn't until after the divorce that I started to realize that I had some serious work to do. For a long time, I placed blame on my ex-husband, on many, many different things. Our divorce was amicable, thank goodness, but there was still hurt and pain. It was an ending. There was a death of a relationship and a grief that had to be dealt with. And as a human, I was petty. I wanted to place blame on someone else, anyone else. And you know how Michelle Obama's like, when they go low, we go high. Yeah, nah. Like there was some not so high things that I wanted to do. And I'm sure vice versa. There's an aspect of self-preservation that comes to play in any separation. And that said, though, the reality was I had to own up to the part I played to the ending of our marriage. And I knew that I didn't want a bitter fight because I had seen what that did to people and to the kids who mine were very young at the time. So I knew that I didn't want to end up in a marriage that was bad or poor. I wanted to do it as amicable as possible. And that meant that I had to swallow my pride and my ego. And yeah, I hated it. Regardless of what society says, when entering separation, you have to take an inward look at the internal childhood and or adolescent circumstances that may have been a part of the issues that led to the separation in the first place. So it's not realistic to place blame, all the blame in one person. Of course, every situation is nuanced. And with the help of a few mental health professionals, I can say that, yep, I had issues to work through. Everyone has issues. It's up to the individual to identify and take action to unpack them so healthy relationships and bonds can be formed. Another lived truth. At a very young age, I went to live with my grandparents in Sierra Leone, West Africa, so that my mom could finish school and divorce my father. See a cycle, anyone? And so in Sierra Leone, even though I didn't have the language for it, I felt displaced, read abandoned. I was raised with affection and care, but I knew I was different. I came to the United States at around age 9 and was introduced to my mom, who had just had a baby boy, my young brother. So there was really no time for bonding. She was a new mom having to hold down two jobs to feed just me and my brother, but also she had to take responsibility for my grandmother who came to live with us from Africa and then later my cousin. So she was busy. And she didn't have time. And now as I grow up, I see that, but that little Olivia, that little Liv didn't really recognize that. And so I was thrown into the school system. I struggled with English and phonetic pronunciation, which resulted in me actually being held back a grade. So not quite African, and not quite American because in Africa they always said I was American. In America, well, I'm African or African American. I was another. I knew I didn't fit in, but I didn't realize that some of these events that had happened in my life would play a huge role in my relationships. A lived truth. You are responsible for your own rescue. I didn't know how to be a daughter. I didn't know how to show affection. Heck, I didn't even know what love was. I viewed love in relation to the lovely things my mom would send me from America. And I heard my grandparents say, your mom loves you. Look at what she sent you. And so for me, I connected love to things. And as a young child, I also wondered where was my father? Like where he at? And why wasn't he sending me things to show his love? It's a little warped thinking now that I think about it and as I say it out loud, but little Liv was thinking, didn't he have my address? So I made up these stories in my head about him looking for me and imagined one day that he would find me and rescue me. Sound familiar? So to me, a husband was someone that would take care of me, rescue me out of whatever situation I found myself in, which is really an unfair thing to ask of a person. And so, real talk, strength and vulnerability wasn't a thing back then. I didn't allow space for friends to really know my internal narrative or really be vulnerable to allow them to ask questions of whether or not I was prepared to be a wife or even if I understood the significance of the commitment of marriage. Girl, I thought I knew everything. And so down the altar I went, even though before that walking down the altar, I knew this was off. I cried about it, but I just chalked it up to, cold feet. And so I went on with the notions of what marriage would be from television shows and from what I gathered from good old Proverbs 31, ill prepared for the hard work, consistent dying to self, a marriage commitment required. I play myself for real, for real. I just knew that I could finally have sex because, baby, I'm married now. I'm grown. I couldn't, nobody tell me nothing. When you watch a scary movie and in the beginning all seems happy, but there's a foreshadowing, a hint of scariness to come. It was kind of like that. The marriage was bliss for a short while, the honeymoon phase, they called it. We traveled, laughed, hung out with friends, had dinner in our Brooklyn apartment, invited people over, went to church regularly. We served and volunteered. We bought a house, and naturally, we started a family. I mean, that's the natural order of things, right? I thought, check the box. That's what you're supposed to do. Not quite sure if there was an exact moment that I can pinpoint when things turned. It was like I just know that after having two kids relatively close in age, having a demanding full-time job and the constant race of getting things done, I realized that the marriage relationship was more of like the business of the house and the kids, and the intimacy, closeness, and the love that I craved was there was a void there, and I didn't know how or what to do about it. And I also didn't know who I could trust or turn to say, yeah, some ain't right. Is this normal? Should I be concerned about this without thinking about judgment or being faced with gossip or anything? Because they tell you as you are dating in a Christian church that keep everything in your relationship private. Don't let others let others know that your relationship is going through anything because they will never forgive you if you tell them something. I don't know if you guys had this when you were in a relationship, but that was something that was in my mind. So I never really shared with anyone anything that was happening in my private and marriage because I was fearful that, they will know our business. Child, I wish I'd have opened my mouth sooner. Anyway, what did I do? Well, I kept on going. The marriage isn't bad, I said, even though I knew something wasn't right, I started to question whether it was all in my head. I leaned on Jesus because, that's what the Christians said, and that's what I'm supposed to be doing. I held on to Bible verses. I sought out counseling. I held out for hope. And then I started to really like, I couldn't really take it anymore. So I really started to share with my friends, but I didn't tell them everything. I didn't really share. It was almost kind of like, let me tell them something so they know that the reason I'm kind of a little off is I couldn't make that up. So I shared them a little bit, but not everything. Because honestly, too, I was ashamed. I also wanted to protect my spouse. I tried my best not to be pessimistic, pushing these feelings deep, deep down and forcing the smiles because, well, I thought to myself, it's not that bad. And I rationalize it like, this is the good old face of like this too shall pass. And so months and years went by and we continued to grow more distant. And oh, the sex, remember I was all joyful that I'm finally getting to have sex. Well, that wasn't really happening or happening as frequently as I wanted. And so, but I tried my best to rekindle the relationship. We tried to spice things up. There were starts and stops, and it really, it wasn't hitting. Like I just wasn't in a good place in the relationship. And we talked about it, and I talked to my then husband and shared what I was going through, but I was careful not to sound too ungrateful because I didn't, you don't want to hurt a person, a spouse or a significant other. So even in your hurt, I was still trying to mask and protect. I also knew I needed to make it work because our kids were young. And so, of course, the good old, like, let's make it work for the kids because what kind of example would we be setting for them? I dreaded the history repeating itself because, after all, I felt like I was repeating the mistakes of my mother and I swore I would never be like her. Well, one January day, I remember the month because it was really cold. And I remember setting intentions for the year. And one of my intentions was around my marriage. I also just remember that my chest was so heavy and so tight. It felt like someone was stepping on it. And I was just carrying this weight for years. And I realized that I really had to do something about it. I had to disrupt this behavior and this pattern. I had to change or I would lose myself. But I still didn't disrupt. I didn't change the pattern. And the worst, I lost myself. I just was walking around numb like a rabid ghost in the day, hiding emotions until finally I went looking for a therapist. And in the intake process, that is when you actually, you know, I realized that there are some things that I was holding in that I had to get out. And when you're looking for a therapist, of course, you answer a series of questions. And one of the questions was, you know, are you depressed? And in my mind, I was like, no. And so, but I talked to the therapist about some of my symptoms, and she was like, you're presenting with depression symptoms. And of course, I was in denial. I was like, hey, the devil is a liar. But in all seriousness, I was because I had been stuck for so long trying to solve all things for all parties when the focus should have been trying to solve for me. And so I went away to a cabin that had no Wi-Fi, no phones, no distractions because I knew I had to get quiet and wrestle with the realization that my marriage was ending, even after years of counseling, prayer, etc. And I faced a fear that God would not love me anymore because I was going to be breaking a promise to him. And so I went there for 3 days. And the end of day two, after lots of ugly crying, it was like I heard this small voice that reminded me that God would never forsake me and never stop loving me, even after a divorce. And so the next morning, I remembered a quote that I had read somewhere that said that you are your own rescue. And it was clear what I had to do. And so at my return from what I call then my clarity break, I moved forward in the co-creation process of a separation plan, a lived truth. Freedom isn't free. So the journey to salvage a marriage, navigating winding roads filled with hope and heartbreak, led to us actually realizing that we had to separate and reach the crossroads of mediation. Despite our shared desire for connection, the path ultimately diverged and the painful beauty of separation and divorce unfolded. Now, in the mediation process, that's when I realized freedom ain't free for real because I had to accept the tremendous cost of divorce. I accepted the fact that I had to pay my spouse out of the house, and I had to accept the terms of the New Jersey law that had to figure out joint court custody. Many people think that the woman automatically gets the kids and the house and the things, but the law is unbiased, believe it or not. And so I knew I had to do the hard thing and pay the price because the alternative would be far greater. I didn't want a nasty battle. And I was already just so tired. I just wanted it to be over. And so I learned that it was okay to start over. And so I started over. I had to learn to build a life that focused on healing for me and for my children, our children. And I realized that I will be paying for therapy forever for me and for the kids. And that's the truth and the reality of a separation and trauma. And there's nothing about the process that was his easy. I hated it. But in the process of rebuilding, I realized I needed to stop at Lowe's to pick up paintbrushes because I was repainting the living room walls a bright white. To me, it was a sign of a fresh start. That was the thought in my head, elite. And I was like, well, that'd be cute. And so my phone rings as I'm parking the car in the parking lot. I questioned the number because I staged screening my calls at the time too. And I couldn't see through the foggy haze of my glasses because I was wearing the wrong mask and it wasn't sitting underneath my glasses the right way. Anyway, so I answered the call and heard, hello, may I speak to Olivia Lewis? Yep, my government that was used, and I knew it was those kinds of calls. So I kind of set up straight immediately and I straightened up my posture. I have no idea. That was like when I hear my government name, I feel like I have to like act right. It's so proper, Olivia. And I was like, yes, speaking. And then it was a pause, and a different voice came to the line, and they said, Miss Lewis, this is Judge James G. Can't say his old name. Are you ready to be divorced? Whew. It was a long journey, and I was going through it, and I am going to unpack all of what I just shared in later episodes. But today I can say that I am thankful that this all happened, because I wouldn't have faced some of the internal issues that I had to work through for my own personal growth. And I wouldn't have attained the tools I needed to foster real relationships. I wouldn't be in a place to understand my own worth. And in my healing journey, I started to open up and share my story with other women. And I realized that I wasn't the only one who had this kind of story to tell. First of all, where were y'all when I was going through what I was going through? But then this got me thinking to how many others may be potentially suffering in silence. And so I'm doing a brave thing again and sharing my lived truth and inviting other women to share theirs. And I hope that this community helps someone work towards their next and to their healing.